Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Story Church Project podcast. Appreciate you guys being here. We are coming to a close to our series on reviewing and reading the book Faith Formation in a Secular Age by Andrew Root. Again, we thank you to all who have gone the book through our affiliate link as we've teamed up with Audible. And if you still haven't done it, remember you can get your free book, free trial by clicking on the link that's in the show notes or also in the description if you're watching on YouTube. But again, thank you guys so much for that support. Today, we're going to be getting into what is faith, so then we can finish off with formation of that faith. But first, we have to define it, and it's going to be great. So let's get right into it. So what if faith is not about strength, but actually about weakness? Or maybe in the end, it's about both. A lot of times we talk about having a strong faith, but we equate this to be strong enough to believe it, right? And just be strong. Believe in that, Jesus has done these things, believe in the religion, believe in God. But what if faith isn't just belief? What if it isn't just commitment? According to Andrew Root, faith has to do with negation. And when you come face to face with negation, then Jesus can come into the story. And the reason we've looked at the secular age is because secular age has the secular age and the age of authenticity has caused us as a church to look at faith as a commitment, as participation with the religion, participation with the institution. And the more we're committed, the more we're participating with the institution, the more quote unquote faith we have. And so Andrew Root now goes into Paul's theology. And I think this is important because it's important to look at Paul, since Paul is living out all of the New Testament. We can go to different places to look at what faith is in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. But Paul, given that he writes all these letters, develops a clear idea inspired by the Holy Spirit to what is faith and how that faith is played out and developed in his own heart. And so he's speaking out of his own testimony. He's speaking out of a faith not as something that he just believes in, but as something that he has experienced himself. So Paul is, I would say Andrew Root hits it on the nail here in looking at Paul, because Paul has experienced this himself. And for Paul, faith is not just about the participation in the institution. It's deeper. It has to do with participation with the being of Christ, with the personhood of Jesus. And so Andrew Root pretty much describes faith in the following way. And I'm going to read it so I don't butcher it. He says, faith is not about being strong enough to believe. It's being weak enough to enter into Christ's death and new life. So faith is about negating oneself, so that as we negate ourselves, now we find ourselves with the opportunity to find Jesus in that negation and to become one with Jesus. It is where our self is now bound to the faithfulness of Jesus Christ. And I like this because this negation, this idea of negation is connected to weakness, according to Andrew Root, right? And so faith can only start to develop when we negate ourselves, when there is a sense of weakness. And he does a comparison between Abraham and Phineas, right? Phineas is someone who was really strong in the faith, and he's acting. He goes and he unalives two people because he's very zealous of the religion. And you have this idea that faith is a strong action. And so in the age of authenticity, we're thinking, well, what makes me strong? What makes me being able to feel good? And the more we participate in this institution, the more we participate with religion, we develop this idea or this facade that we have a strong faith. And it's interesting because Andrew Root says that Saul develops a faith, before he's converted. he has a faith where he kind of connects with Phineas, right? Where it's like, I'm going to persecute. I am very zealous of the word. I am very committed. And he was very committed. He was very, very committed, and he had a lot of participation. He was actually going above and beyond with the religious institution. But it's interesting that he thinks he's developed a strong faith. We're adding that adjective before, this strong faith, when in reality, faith has more to do with weakness, because as he's going to persecute, right? He's heading to persecute Christians. He feels strong. He feels he's doing the Lord's work. So he feels he has a strong faith like Phineas. But in that strength, Jesus blinds him. Jesus literally knocks him off of his horse. Literally, Jesus took away the ability from Saul to lead. As a matter of fact, he literally took away his ability to even move. Right? Saul had to be confined to a room now. He was in a house, like he couldn't move. He couldn't lead, although he was sitting on his, high horse, no pun intended. He's thinking, I'm strong. But now Jesus blinds him, weakens him to the point where he can't even move, let alone lead in this institution that he is so zealous of. And Jesus then asks him, right? He asks him, hey, Saul, why do you persecute me? Like, you have this idea that you have a faith, a strong faith, but in reality, it's not faith. You're persecuting the person you say you believe in. And now there's a reversal of power, and it's reversed into dependence. And we have to keep this in mind, because this is the experience of Saul. Right? This is how he defines faith later on throughout his letters. It's based off of that moment, off of his life, off of how he thought he had a strong faith, but that strong faith wasn't really faith at all. It was a commitment, yes. He was participating in an institution, yes, but there was no transcendence in that faith. There was no personhood. There was no person involved. And that's why in Paul's letter, Abraham also is called the father of faith, right? And it's interesting because Abraham is also marked by faith, but in weakness, not in strength. See, when God calls Abraham, he calls him to leave everything behind. I mean, Abraham was good, right? Abraham had good status. There was financial status. There was class status. I mean, he was good, but God is calling him to live out his faith in weakness by leaving all those things behind, by negating himself so that he may depend and find God. Andrew Root says that God starts to form righteousness in Abraham through negation. Righteousness is not so much by the participation or just doing things for the institution. There has to be that element where Abraham said, you know what? There's no signs yet that this is going to work. It seems impossible. It seems crazy, but I'm going to do it because somebody, like an actual person, is telling me to walk into what he's telling me to walk into. There's this element that there's an element of death. In faith, there has to be an element of death, right? Saul is going somewhere. He feels alive. He feels like he's doing what he has to do because he's participating. He's doing. He has this sense that he's being his authentic self, right? I can do things, but he hasn't died yet, and not a death of like a literal one, but a death in the soul. And the same thing can be applied to Abraham. This is actually a direct quote. Abraham trusts that though he is impossibly old and his wife is impossibly barren, the word takes what is dead to make it alive, right? Because there's no life in their relationship. There's no life that's going to come from Abraham and Sarah, and yet God says there will be life because there's this transcendent element that has said, hey, what is dead, I will make it alive. I will give you a son. I will bless you. And I will bless other nations through you. But those promises, that faith, that righteousness wasn't going to be developed off of strength, if anything, off of weakness, because you're leaving the strong parts behind. You're leaving your financial comfort. You're leaving your class comfort, right? You're leaving your comfort in general in order to pursue what someone has told you is going to happen, even though you don't have signs it's going to happen. And that's why we need to understand that faith isn't just a membership. And I don't know how much of a disservice we've done by using this term membership in the church, right? And there's still this discussion of, when someone gets baptized, they're also a member of the church. And I know, this is good things. I'm not going to get into that too much. But there is this, we have to think about this and evaluate this. It's not just about being a member of an institution. It's not just even about being committed, right? When we tell people or young people, hey, let's develop a faith, well, you have to commit more. You have to commit more, or be stronger to commit, or believe stronger. Like, just, commit to the institution, participate in the institution, commit more. But Paul is not just talking about a commitment of something you do. He's talking more about entering a different reality. He's talking about entering a whole new reality. And that's why he says things like, it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. So when we face negation, that's where we start to find the opportunity to become one with Jesus. So union with Jesus comes through negation. It doesn't go around negation. That's why Paul says, I'm crucified with Christ. This sense of saying crucified is a huge thing back in Paul's days. Crucifixion has to do literally with death. And so Paul is saying, I'm crucified with Christ. I participate in death because in order for me to come into a new reality, I have to face this negation. Faith cannot happen, cannot exist without negation. Faith cannot exist without this death to self, so that in order for us to have that faith, which is union with Christ, which is being bound to the faithfulness of Jesus, to the person of Jesus, but that can't happen unless I've died, unless I've negated myself. And this is the crazy part. This is something that actually sounds weak. It looks weak even, but it's actually, according to the way Paul paints it, one of the strongest things that can happen in the universe. Today's modern faith formation sounds like, hey, let's try harder, or let's create more programs so people can participate more, or even just getting young people involved, even just getting young people to do things, to feel good about. And I'm gonna say this, right? It's important. All these things, because faith will lead us to do those things. Paul did a whole bunch of those good things that we still do today, right? Even doing social work and all that stuff, like that's great stuff. But that in and of itself is not faith. Faith clearly, biblically speaking, has to do with brokenness. It's a divine act that happens when we are broken, when we negate ourselves. And so faith is not even just knowing more information or knowing more about God, although we do need that, right? Like even in this podcast, we've talked about the importance of doctrine and the importance of knowing Christ. But it's not just about knowing those things. It's about experiencing our life through the narrative of the personhood of Jesus Christ, his life, his death, and his resurrection. And so the question comes, as we live in this secular age of authenticity, and as we're inviting others to grow in their faith, how do we define faith? Have we ourselves gone through the experience of negation? Where have you experienced loss? In your Christian journey, have you experienced weakness? Have you experienced maybe even confusion? Well, biblically speaking, it's in those places where we have the opportunity to experience our union with Christ. It's in the brokenness, it's in the death to self, it's in the negation, maybe even in the confusion, where God shows up and says, hey, here I want to do something amazing, right? I want to knock you off your high horse. But not to, mess you up, but so you can experience who I am. We need to start defining faith more than just in an epistemological point of view, more like ontological, more of about being, because faith has to do with becoming one with the person, with an actual person, and his name would be Jesus Christ. So faith is not just something we perform. Faith is a gift. Faith is a union. Faith is a death and at the same time, a resurrection with Jesus Christ. Are we experiencing that as a church? And if we're not experiencing that as a church, then that's not what we're going to be teaching as a church. I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Get into this conversation. See if negation is something. I know Francis Chan talks about this also, where he says that, when it comes to suffering, when it comes to loss, like that's something that as a church we don't touch too much on. And he calls it more of a theology of suffering, but we don't like this idea where we have to carry a cross. And Jesus said it straight up, right? Like he said, if you can't carry a cross, if you can't literally negate yourself and follow me, then you can't be my disciple. And maybe discipleship, not maybe, but discipleship, biblically speaking, and based on what Paul experienced, is not just believing in the information and participating in the information of the institution. It has to do with that mystical, although it's not magical, but it is a real union with a person. That person is Jesus. You guys should check this book out. If you haven't gotten it, remember you can always click on the show notes. There's a link there where you can get your free copy. All you have to do is click on it, search, register with Audible, and get your free copy of Andrew Root's Faith Formation in a Secular Age. And you can follow us along. We're going to do one more episode next week, and then we'll be going into a break. That will conclude our series for this book. Again, thank you guys so much for connecting, for listening in, for sharing. Start the conversation, get these conversations going. Ask the Spirit to lead you to say, hey, have I experienced negation? Is this something that I need to do more, God? Anyway, I think it's a great starting point also for our churches, and then also in our way of how we can reach those who are also unchurched in today's day and age. Okay, guys, thank you again for being in another episode of the Story Church Project podcast. And yeah, we'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.